Hi everybody, my name is Larsen. In this video I'm going to take a slightly different approach from what I normally do, because I'm going to focus on how to play the example that you just heard me play. I think when it comes to soloing in a chord melody format, so where you really have to play an improvisation and harmonize it and also give some sort of bass line to it, then there are a lot of things that need to come together, and the best way to illustrate how this works is probably just to show you an example of how I do it and also how I play it, and in that way give you some materials. You can of course learn to play the example that I'm demonstrating here. That's going to give you a lot of vocabulary and some ideas, but you can also use the things that I talk about here as a way of creating your own improvisations and start working on improvising in this setting. So I'm going to go over how I'm playing this in terms of which fingers I use and what the focus is while I'm playing it. So am I thinking about the bass line or am I thinking about the chords, and how this all comes together, and also of course like which fingers I'm using on my right hand or on my left hand, because that is actually a huge part of this. I think when it comes to improvising in this setting, a lot of it is really about getting the technique to work together, and usually I don't talk so much about things like this, but I think for this topic that actually makes a lot of sense. And of course I'm curious what you think about this way of doing lessons, so if you have an opinion on this, if you want me to do more videos like this, then leave a comment on this video. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, improve the way that you solo, check out some interesting arpeggios or chord voicings, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. A huge part of the chords that I'm using when I'm improvising like this is actually shell-voicings, because in that way I can lay down a complete chord. And another thing that I'm using a lot is sort of a call response idea. Of course with the blues that works really well. So here I'm starting the first bar with just playing the shell voicing of the C7 and then moving straight into a melody. So, and now I need to transition. So really it's just playing the chord and then a ghost note I'm using for a bass note here. So sometimes you can't play a complete bass note and you just keep things moving by either repeating notes or making a ghost note like this. And that's kind of what's happening here. So simple. This is really just a C6 arpeggio, this simple melody. Of course it's a blues, so you can play simple melodies. Down to another shell voicing, that's the F7. And here I'm now moving into a harmonized melodic idea. So what I'm doing is that I'm playing first the shell voicing and then the melody part. So again, call response idea. And that's really a similar idea to, in terms of melody, to what I had on the C7, because it's still just a part of an F6 arpeggio. And then I'm adding, so I'm playing this voicing. Now I don't really have room for a bass note, but I just use the lowest note in the voicing, which is in this case the third, as a sort of bass note in between, just to keep things moving and add the feeling of groove. So then we get a leading note. Now I do the bass note. And then moving up to a C7. I'm again playing the C7 as a shell voicing here. But I'm splitting it up. So first the bass note. And then the high melody. Repeating the bass note. And then adding some melodies. Now I already stated the chord and the bass. And then I can use the rest of the bar just to play melody. And here we have a clear example of where very often when I'm improvising in this setting, I'll let the melody be the most important thing. The melody is actually the most important thing. That happens when you're playing just a harmonization of a standard or something like that, but also in a solo. So here, the most important thing is that we get that melody to sit right here, and then I add the chord later. So here in bar 4, now we get G minor 7 to C7 altered, and I come out on the A, and then I play the chord, the G minor under it, moving on to C7. So the melody here is really this simple. Again, when you're playing in this setting, you're not going to be playing a lot of dense 8-note lines. So it makes sense to really focus on simple melodies that are usually also pretty sort of tied into the basic chord. Of course, with the blues, that anyway works better, but also just because that's easier to play. And you can always add, you will see examples also later where I start adding more extensions, and of course you already have alterations here, but the important thing is that you play a melody that really sounds like a melody and that you don't sound like you're just trying to put a bunch of chords next to each other. So the important thing here is really that we have a melody that makes sense, and then adding the rest afterwards is really just sort of an embellishment and almost not necessary. This would have worked too. Oh, sorry. So if I play the first 4 bars slowly, it sounds like this. On the F7, I'm kind of starting with the same idea as I did in the very first bar, because first I'm just playing the chord. In this case, it's just an F7 with a 9. And then that's just used as laying down the harmony. It's not really a melodic chord there. So sometimes you're going to have chords where the top note in the chord is going to be a part of the melody that you're playing. We had that with the G minor 7. But here, it's just there as a chord, and then the melody comes afterwards. And we're again using this chord response to first lay down the harmony and then add the melody. And then up to an F7 with a 13 here. And I'm using the same idea again, creating movement by just repeating the lowest note in the chord. It is a very sort of simple chord tone, so it will work as a solo bass note as well. And it's not really perceived as a walking bass anyway, because we don't really have time to add a complete walking bass line under a solo like this. And then we get this melody on the F7. So, and I'm harmonizing the top notes. This is really also just working with what's possible and what's easy to reach. Of course, if I'm playing this F7, then this one is already associated with it. So that's why I'm also easily going to that one. And then I kind of leave the basic part of this ringing. So, and in that way, just keep the sound of the harmony there while I'm playing the melody. I guess in terms of this, I mean, most of the time I'm using these 4 fingers in my right hand, and then I'm just switching that up. There's no real system. This is really something that I'm not thinking about at all. But I will play a lot of 3-note chords where I kind of just use these 3 fingers and then use my 3rd finger for the melody. And here when I'm using 4 notes, it's usually just the thumb. And that's also one of the reasons why I'm repeating that note here, because this is the finger that I'm using for bass movement anyway. And that's why I'm also sometimes using the lowest note in a chord as a bass, even though it's not really a note that's in a bass line. And it doesn't really matter too much, because in a practical situation, it just keeps things moving. And this is just about creating some movement and some groove. And that soft note added here will help with that. And it doesn't interfere with the melody, as you can hear. Then we're moving to F sharp diminished. And here again, this is the melody. It's kind of like a blues idea. Of course, kept simple phrasing wise, because that's what we can handle in this setting. But I'm really letting the melody rule here and not adding anything under it. And then once the melody is played, I'm adding the rest of the diminished chord. First, this inversion with the E flat in the bass, and then moving up to the one with the F sharp in the bass. And then we get a leading note to take us back to C. Shell-voicing again. And then moving up and taking the high C as a melody. So here I'm really barring again to get this. And that's this idea of, and that's something that's also really useful to check out. If you want to make your own arrangements like this, if you want to improvise your own solos, then experiment with using different fingerings for the shell-voicings, because they're going to give you different things that you can play. And you want to kind of be really used to just switching between them and use whatever works in the situation. That's a really important part of this also. So it makes sense to actually go even from this to this to this, and just really just try the different versions and see what works. If you have to play a flat 5, then this one is better. If you have to play the 5th, this one works. This, and there's not one version that's going to be better than the rest. They all have different applications, and you kind of want to have them all in there because they're going to allow you to play different melodies. So here I'm starting just with the bar version of it. Of course, the problem with the bar version is if you play with a pick, you can't play this, this, and this, and bar here, because then you're going to get a lot of other notes ringing that you don't want to have ringing. But in this case, I'm playing with my fingers, so that works. So, and here and it sounds kind of old-fashioned blues to just repeat the bass note here, but it does. I think for this, it kind of works to just have that movement in there. So, and again, this is really just about what is possible, what is practical, and repeating the bass note like this is not really an issue. And if I had to change it, then that would require me to either give up the bar here that I'm using, or to use another finger, and that gets tricky quite quickly. So, and that's also what I'm doing later in this example. So if we first get this melody, so, and it's almost as if I'm quickly implying an F7 here, at least that's in the bass. Moving down to this E half diminished. I'm not playing a complete E half diminished, I'm playing an E minor without a 5th. And here I'm adding a little more bass line. There's a bit of a curious thing happening, because I think what I hear is that when I let go here of the E, you can hear the A, and that actually gives me a bass line that sounds like this. So we kind of get a leading note up to the B flat here on the one hand. And then the B flat is leading me down to the A7, shell voicing again, adding the flat 13 as melody, so, and then repeating the bass note. The second 4 bars played slowly sound like this. The reason that I can keep on publishing videos every week is that there is a community of people over on Patreon that are supporting the channel. I'm very grateful for their support, and it's because of them that I can keep on making all these jazz guitar and music theory videos. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. And if you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for your support. The last 4 bars here are really demonstrating how a more Bebop line would sound in a setting like this, because here we have a longer 2-5-1, and it really lends itself a lot better to playing that type of melody. And also it is really a place where the jazz blues is sounding, well, at least less like a blues. And so we have a bar of D minor and a bar of G7. The line I'm playing here is, if you watched some of the videos that I made on how to solo in a chord melody setting already, I've made a few of those, then you will see that I talk about different positions. And here I'm actually shifting from one position to the next. This is something that I didn't cover in those lessons. I might make some exercises on doing this, because that's something you run into really fast. If you have to play a chord under the melody that you're playing, that means that you want to keep your melody on the higher strings. And if you have a melody that moves a lot, you don't have as much of a range if you're only using like 2, maybe 3 strings to play the melody. But if you want to play something that has like a range where you need a 7th chord arpeggio, then you kind of need an octave. And that most of the time means that you have to shift position. And that's what I'm doing here on the D minor 7. So I'm starting with just really a basic drop 2 D minor 7, complete voicing. And then using what's practical here, you can play a melody where you're just using one note here, and I can harmonize the whole thing, because all I do is just repeat the chord and play the 3 middle strings. Then I'm moving up to this note, the C, which is still within this chord, the range of this chord at least. And then I shift position up to, actually I think I play all 3 strings here. Shift up to the next position, which is around this D minor chord, and play the D minor 9, running down the scale. And of course, I can do this while the chord is still ringing. So and then transitioning into G7. And the G7, I'm starting with just playing 2 notes from the chord, first the root, just to state what the root of the 5 is, adding the 3rd. And it's really just like filling up the gap here, so I don't have any melody for the first beat, that's on beat 2. Adding the bass note again in between. And then the melody becomes. And then adding the D to take us back to the C for the final turnaround. Going down to, let's see, that's this C7 shell voicing. So first, just the shell voicing, with now the melody is the E, adding more melody with the G and the A. Bass note to take us up to A7. And then the focus here is really sort of going back and forth between the melody and the bass line. So, and I'm really only adding chords if it fits with what I'm doing with the melody. And that's kind of easy for the first one because that's really just an A7 sharp 9. So then focus back to the bass line. So what we have here for the D minor is first the bass note, chord, and then really just a simple scale melody up to the G7 altered, and really just using the B flat, A flat, so the sharp 9, flat 9. And again, this is something that's included in the voicing. If you have this one is really close by and it's just very practical to play. That is the reason why you want to use that. And then again moving the bass here. So the idea here is really just to have sort of a conversation happening. So you have the bass line moving and then you put the melody in between that, and then at the very end on the G7 it kind of comes together where you have bass line and melody at the same time. And then the coda to this one, which is just B flat 7 to B7 up to C7, then adding the 5th as the final melody. Of course, I'm curious what you think about this format, and if you would like to see more videos like this one, then leave a comment on this video. And of course, you can also let me know if you have an idea for a form or a song that I should work with when it comes to this kind of topic. If you want to check out some more videos on chord soloing in this setting or in other settings, then check out a video in this playlist. And of course, if you want to learn more about jazz guitar and this is the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. That's about it for this time. Thank you for watching, and until next time.